Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second webinar in our free webinar series from the Soil CRC at present. My name's Catherine Allen, and before we start today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we're coming to you from today in this virtual space. And we'd also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you're all joining today. So before we get into the webinar, I'd like to, for those who haven't been to the webinars before or who haven't had much to do with the Soil CRC, just a quick reminder that we're a collaborative research centre, and the C at the start and the R are really important. It's a collaboration of farmers, industry and scientists, 39 partners across Australia, 8 universities, 4 government agencies, 7 industry partners and 20 grower groups. And together, in various arrangements, we deliver research that helps farmers improve their soil performance and increase their productivity and profitability. We've had 10 years of funding. You can see 2017 to 2027. So we're at the stage where there's lots to be reporting on. It's the largest collaborative soil research effort in Australia's history, and we're really excited to be able to share our outputs with you. Give a nod to our various major partners and associates. There are 4 programs in the Soil CRC. Today, the webinar is coming to you from Program 1. That's the program that I'm the leader of, which is why I'm here. Program 1 is projects which are focused on the human context in which soil science occurs. So the Soil CRC is about soil. It's about soil management. It's about decisions that are made with soil. It's about how soil fits into the wider agricultural and social fabric of Australia. So it's important to consider the human contexts. So all the research in Program 1 is collaborative. It's built on interactions among farmer groups, university researchers and industry, and that's cited today. We do research in Program 1 in 3 areas: the economics and norms and practices that influence decisions, market and policy settings, institutional arrangements that promote good soil stewardship, and an area around knowledge and wisdom about soil and its management and how it can be supported and shared. And today's webinar is, again, in that knowledge and wisdom about soil and soil management area. In particular, it's about understanding the people who manage soils to support effective and efficient sharing of knowledge and showcasing how collaboration facilitates rigorous, relevant research. And we've got 3 speakers who can really highlight. Before I hand over to them, I'd just like to do a little bit of housekeeping. This is being recorded. The recording will be available on the Soil CRC Knowledge Hub, the webpage. During the webinar, we have 100 people registered. There's many people here today. So it is a webinar rather than a meeting. So cameras off, microphones muted, please. Please ask questions though. And if you could put the questions into the Q&A box, because then other people can say, yeah, that's a great question, uptick it, sort of thing. You can use the chat to say hello, introduce yourself, say what country you're on, whatever, but use the Q&A box for questions. We'll have about 60 minutes once I stop rabbiting, and that includes a good lot of time for question and answer. As you leave the seminar, there'll be a short survey. This is to help make the webinars better and also for you to say what topics might be of interest. And I'll thank you for your participation in the webinar today. So I will hand over to the 3 presenters today. Associate Professor Hanabeth Luke is Sustainable Agricultural Specialist at Murdoch University in Western Australia and the Soil CRC project lead. Hanabeth's undertaken a lot of research in Program 1, leads many programs, working in partnership in this particular project with over 30 industry groups in Australia. We also have David Brennan, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Wimmera Catchment Management Authority, that's in Western Victoria. David worked with a range of stakeholders and partners in practice, water management, biodiversity, building community, and he's had a lot of experience with the social benchmarking surveys. We also have Naomi Scholz, who's the Executive Officer, Ag Innovations and Research in the Eyre Peninsula, South Australia. Naomi has also had many years' experience with agriculture and land care. Both Naomi and David will share their experiences of working with the social benchmarking. Over to you, Hanabeth.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Catherine. Thanks to the Soil CRC for the opportunity to share this work today. Just like to also acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Noongar Nation today, and just to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and say thank you so much. We have nearly 100 people online here today to hear about this work that we've been doing for some time. So I think, before I go on, I think it's just really important to just recognize the value and my gratitude to the Soil CRC for recognizing the importance of that social dimension in soil management, because we have hundreds of millions of dollars each year go into agricultural research, and millions more go into natural resource management and how we take care of our lands. And how do we ensure that those decisions and those strategic priorities that we're mapping out are based on the needs and priorities of landholders? So that's what this work really is about. Transforming landholder aspirations into action and policy. And I'd like to acknowledge particularly Simon McDonald, Dr. Matthew Alexanderson, and Professor Catherine Allen, who are Catherine's more than our program leader. She's also a key partner on this project, and there are many more. So what I'm going to be doing today is just giving a bit of an overview, a little bit of information on the background, why we do what we do, and also the methodology, because the rigor of this approach really matters. And then, of course, talking about some of the data and some of the patterns and things that we are finding. Now we are 6 years into this 7-year project. And then I'm going to show you and give you a sneak preview of the work and the dashboard that our team is developing. So just first and foremost, what we're doing is absolutely based on rigor, and it follows best practice survey methods. So it's really important for us that the work that we're doing is based on what is important to local partners. So this co-design process, I'll talk a bit more about in a moment. And it has a very clear process for developing the surveys, implementing the surveys, and also in analysing those surveys themselves. The surveys themselves are, so we've run the methodology in 7 farming regions now, 2 in Victoria, 2 in Western Australia, and in every other state but Queensland so far. And we send out mail-out surveys, so paper surveys. They still can play a really important role, and particularly some people are really likely to fill those out over other demographics. And we spatially reference the data, so when we know that when we get these social trends across a landscape, we can map that with things like soil type, rainfall, and other biophysical factors. And we'll talk about this quite a bit, but that's why we've got Naomi and David here today to talk about how it can shape and inform strategic planning across Australia. So just like to acknowledge that this is the efforts of an enormous team over this time, and based on the work that was done before my time by Professor Alan Curtis, And the exciting thing being that, the Wimmera who with David here today have been doing this work for decades, and this will be the sixth survey that we're developing up at the moment. And something like this is an enormously collaborative process. And so the co-design work that we do, that is around, okay, so we would like to run a survey. Would you be interested in doing it in your region? First of all, who's interested in being a part of this? And once people say, yep, I think this can be of value to our organization, we work with that group to bring in other key stakeholders of theirs to say, right, what do you need to know about landholders in your region? What's going to help you as an organization to shape your priorities and funding focus for the next foreseeable future? And so I'll go out to those regions. As you know, I think I've seen the list of people that have attended and have registered today are nearly 200. And, you're in a very broad diversity of industries and organizations. So trying to get a sense of who are those different organizations within each region is really important as well. So we try and bring in a diversity of those organizations in each region. And they also help us to determine the boundaries and how far we're going to send this postal survey to. And we don't just send out a postal survey, we also send a whole bunch of other paperwork and a QR code that links to an online survey. So we augment it with an online survey as well. And we have the survey itself has this core to it. There are things that we ask across all regions and key components around property management, future plans, and then there are local areas of focus. And sometimes they become so useful that we bring them across to other areas as well that we then survey because and that's helped to enrich and grow the survey over time into what it is now. And there are broadly these various different sections of the survey in everything from very basic typologies, full-time farmers, part-time farmers, non-farmers and hobby farmers, through to what are the practices they do, what is their knowledge of undertaking those practices, what's their experience around a range of topics, what confidence do they have in applying practices, and then where do they get information from, trusted information sources, issues on a regional and local scale, and the background factors like their perspectives and propensity to risk, views on climate and weather impacts, underlying values, and a whole range of factors around how the property is managed, and of course, with huge focus on how people manage their soil and soil knowledge in particular. But that is one aspect of what has become a broad net of information around what is important to landholders, and ultimately how what's up here can have an influence on the soil beneath our feet. So now I'm just going to provide a little bit of information and insight into some of this research. Obviously, there's a huge amount that we've developed and lots of reports that you can look at, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of a sneak preview today into what this kind of data can do. So very, very briefly, we can get sense of patterns of types of landholders in each region. And this work is based on the PhD work of Teresa de Groth. And she worked out that there are 4 really useful self-identifying categories of landholders, which is full-time, part-time, hobby farmers, and non-farming landholders, as I mentioned before. And we can, through this, as we undertake the initial surveys and then the follow-up surveys, as we've been funded to do with the Soil CRC, we can start to see how things like patterns of land management are changing. And we are seeing, I would say, what I found really interesting is now we're doing the follow-up surveys, how much change there is in some areas and how little there is in others. So in itself, these sorts of constructs can be quite useful going forward. Now, here we have a large table, and I know last week we talked about the knowledge sharing approaches, so not giving people too much information on a slide. And yes, I will be testing you on this one, particularly the age of farm. What I've done is the highest of each of these rows I've made green, and the lowest I've grayed out. And particularly the oldest and the youngest groups of farmers, just have a look at that because I'm going to come back to that later. But look, the purpose of this slide is to show you the kind of broad information that we have about what's happening in the regions, how old farmers are on average, and of course we can cross-check that with other data in the region, but also things like the percentage of women who have input in decision making, which is generally lower for full-time farmers, and who's working on the property, who lives on the property, things like whole farm planning that we found to be really, really important. How many people have that in place solidly? And the FTF there, that abbreviation means full-time farmers. So oftentimes our partners ask us to cut and analyze the data that's useful to them particularly. And because we work with a lot of farming system groups, we it's really important to focus on that in some areas, and we'll focus more on NRM in other regions. And as you can see, those are the 6 key regions that we've looked at so far. And we're now looking at 2 regions in WA that we've got surveys currently in mailboxes at the moment. So in Tasmania, we surveyed the whole state almost. And the Wimmera region of Western Victoria, Central West region of New South Wales, the Northern Wheatbelt in 2020, the Eyre Peninsula, and the North Central region of Victoria. So this is the data that we have thus far. And so from this, we're able to say, well, what are the key challenges that landholders are experiencing at this time? And we can look at that at the regional scale. And from this data, you can see that there are some broad challenges, and there's a bit of bunching there. You can see that water security comes up as solid and clear across all regions, but also the second most important issue is actually a social one. So it's not environmental or economic, it's about services and infrastructure in the regions, and that comes up as really, really key in some regions over others. But other things crop up as well. Changes in weather patterns is consistently very important, as is social license to operate, which will always usually be in the top 4 or 5 regional issues. And on the property scale, you can see soil erosion, but also is top there. But declining nutrient status is also really key. And we're finding is of increasing importance is that uncertainty of returns, limiting the capacity to reinvest. So this is really important information that our partners have been using in their strategic planning. And we also have open questions. So we have a question which is, what do you see as the biggest challenge in the next 10 years? And we ask people, and that allows us to capture things that maybe we didn't ask in those closed or quantitative questions. And from this, you can see broad patterns and I'd say very consistently across most regions, we have climate change, whether it's called that or it's more discussed around increasing drought or weather variability, but also succession. So climate and succession come up on time and time again as key top issues, but also rising input costs is an emerging important issue, particularly over the life of this survey. We're seeing that coming up sharply as a key issue. Importantly, the devil can also be lost in the detail, and every region is different and has particular issues. And this is zooming in on some of the data that we had from the recent social benchmarking survey on the Eyre Peninsula. And so there you can see that really in the center there is rising costs, and this is despite it being a drought year. So the higher input costs against that lowered yield played a very, very important in people's minds, as you can see. And there's a daft graph there just showing rising input costs steadily over time. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here focusing in on some of the data from the Eyre Peninsula, just to give you a bit of an example of what we found there, and how also particularly how the data can be used to inform strategic planning. You can see here on the Eyre Peninsula, we've got the district scale issues, and this survey was actually ended in the beginning of, there was a January this year, but mostly undertaken in 2024. And you can see there that the absence of important services came up as #1 in the Eyre Peninsula, and this was very similar to what we found in 2020 when we ran the survey. Water security, support for new young farmers, and this is specific to full-time farmers, this data, I should say also. Property scale, again, rising input cost, absolutely huge. Almost every farmer is saying this is a major challenge for me. So and seeing the difference across the region and on the farm can be quite useful as well. And we can look at that and how these things have changed over time. And this, now that you see the questions are a little bit different, how you cut the data is always important. This is for all landholders on the Eyre Peninsula. So although absence of services was number one for full-time farmers, it dilutes a bit when you have all the other types of farmers, hence why we find those typologies really useful. So water security comes up as number one, as it did in 2024. Service availability comes up as number two, and the support for new young farmers is also really, really key, as is the availability of water for livestock. Interesting though, you look at the numbers, the support for new young farmers actually has gone up in that time as well. So that's really key as well. And you can see there's the declining soil health or productivity, which was actually the next one down in 2020, is popped up there in 2024. So just to repeat some of those factors we've already looked at, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on the climate change perspectives and how that can shape land management, because I think it's really important and kind of topical. And I saw there's a question that came through overnight about this and how it might be influencing land management with all the discussions around net zero we're experiencing at the moment. And so these are the key issues that farmers are finding important that do relate to climate. And this is this is obviously a whole range of different things here. And this is again Eyre Peninsula data specifically. And then we look at the practice change, and I think there's a really interesting pattern that's popping up here. And that is so you can see that the full changing of on property operations as a result of changing weather patterns. Yes, that's something we do. But have you changed your operations to increase soil carbon on your property? That's higher. But when it comes down to changing your on-property operations around specifically reducing carbon emissions, no, it's much, much lower. It's not become a major priority. And whereas then you have this data here about perspectives of climate is therefore quite important, and actually starts to show us some really important things. So when we look at, again, the full-time farmers, who are the main landholder type in this region, we have that this human activities are changing climate is less than 50% of full-time farmers, but also primary producers should do all they can to reduce carbon emissions. Very, very low. Particularly for full-time farmers, they're looking at about 26%. However, if you look at landholders should manage their properties in expectation of a highly variable climate, it's really, really high. That's the highest for full-time farmers. So people are saying, look, this is what we do. This is how we should be managing our land. However, we don't think it's necessarily the responsibility of farmers. So I think there's some really interesting and important things there. And also over on the far right there, fundamental changes are required to make our farming systems more resilient. There's some really, really interesting qualitative additions to those questions. It's like, no, incremental is fine. We're happy with just moving the dial more slowly. Whereas in other regions, you will find a larger proportion of landholders and farmers saying, yep, we need fundamental changes. We really need to shake things up. And that can differ. Interestingly, that's much, much higher for the part-time farmers. So there's a lot to unpack here. And in terms of land management, we're looking broadly at what kind of land use people have, and also how they are managing their land, specific practices. And then, of course, we can map all of these different factors around those practices that they're undertaking in each region and understand what the drivers are. And what we have found most certainly across this time is that the drivers are different in each region. There isn't, farmers are very different across different regions. They have different priorities, different challenges, different soil types, different weather types, and we can see that reflected in the data. And they also have different cultures, different ways of different things that are important to prioritize within those regions. So just some really basic sort of frameworks and things that we look at. Knowledge, practices on the far left, knowledges and confidence in applying them. And we can look at the data and we can provide this kind of information to our partners and say, look, really simply, we look at things like, okay, well, 83% 3% of farmers are saying that soil testing is essential and we should be doing it, and yet only 55% are doing it. Well, why? And on the Eyre Peninsula, we're able to say, well, actually, it's the nutrient budget is there's an opportunity for the supporting organisations to improve and boost that knowledge in that space. And Naomi, to your credit, we've got some really positive data from the Eyre Peninsula that landholder knowledge of a whole range of best practices, these ones here, has gone up in a substantial way over the last few years since the first survey was undertaken. So you should be proud of those efforts, Naomi and team. Also, things like time-controlled cell or holistic grazing, perhaps it's more of an emerging practice. Only 47% think it's think it's generally a good idea. Well, only 12% are doing it. Again, only 23% know how to do it. So again, knowledge can be a really important lever for change. So we have these key elements driving farmer decision-making, characteristics, demographics, of course, the underlying priorities, yes, but also the practicalities of time and money. And then in terms of just sharing knowledge, and this was talked about a lot in webinar 1, the knowledge levels of different practices, but who they have as trusted sources and who they're accessing for information is really important. And in terms of how people will listen. But specifically for resilience-focused practices, we found that belief in climate change actually can be a really important driver for specific practices, as you've seen in some of that data I just showed you previously. But also succession planning is really important for resilience-focused practices, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. And so when we do specific modelling, we do a whole range of statistics, and some of you out there might be absolute stats buffs with the group that we have attending here today, and others will be perhaps not so much. So we compare how strongly linked some items in the survey are to others. So we look at whole farm planning and find what are the factors in that survey of the 300 items that are most strongly linked to this item. So we find knowledge around how to do whole farm planning, around soil management, and nutrient budgeting, really, really important. Having a future focus on diversification popped up as really important. And the value of the farm, particularly as a family farm, and having a sense of belonging was really important. And they were more likely to have a child working on the farm, but also size of the farm was important. Larger farms were more likely to have whole farm plans. It's logical. Having an adaptive learning mindset, being open to learning, seeing oneself as an early adopter, and also long-term strategic decision making. So these sorts of things I do for a lot of the best practices. And from this over time, we start to see some patterns around what are the most important linkages. And what we do, and Simon Whiston-McDonald, our statistician on this project, will then look at, well, what of all of these factors that we're looking at within all of those subgroups there are going to be most likely driving practice implementation. So what are the 5 things that are really going to shape and work together to influence the implementation of that best practice? And that's what the next tables are, these graphs are about here. So many of you out there who enjoy the statistics, the R squared there, I think Professor Al Curtis said to me, if it's above a 0.4, you can write a check about it. So these are quite strong models. So if you're doing whole farm planning, and note that this is data from North Central Victoria. So we've got, if you're doing whole farm planning, there's a longer time frame of decision making from seasonal through to 6 to 20-year cycles. So it makes a really big difference when people have made that plan, they're thinking about the longer term as well. There's a real linkage between the two. They understand and have resources for business planning. They are more likely to also have a succession plan in place. And those two are also found to be very, very strongly linked. They're likely to have a larger area of land and a strong knowledge, interestingly, of holistic grazing. So there you go. And in terms of time-controlled or holistic grazing as a practice, confidence is going to work. We know how to do it. We want to be a part of positive change in farming. We have a succession plan in place, and overall, we're decreasing the use of synthetics per hectare. So these are the kind of things that pop up when we look at what are the best sort of most strongest relationships. We put them in, and then the strongest 5 will come up in these models, and that's how we do this. But you'll see from there, succession planning is one of those things that keeps popping up as a really important driver. So, so these two here are about having a successor in place, having an advanced succession plan. So this one, they were both slightly different questions, notably. Both of them link into the use of our partner organization. I didn't rig that. They just popped up in the statistics, just for the record. So the importance of those organizations, it comes up in our data. That they're also, if they've got a successor in place, they've got children on the property, they're more likely to be decreasing their use of synthetics per hectare overall. They want to be a part of positive change in farming, have an advanced succession plan, and then having the advanced succession plan, and this is South Australian data now, so this is not actually directly linked. We just asked slightly different questions when in the report that I pulled this from. So they've got good systems in place. The family's involved in decision making. They are working less hours per week. Maybe the kids are helping out more. This is the landholder, and they're also planting legumes. There you go. Building up the nitrogen in that soil. And the succession planning, the succession planning itself has a bit of a pipeline, and I'm really interested personally in this pipeline and how it works. So we've got this intention to keep the farm in the family. This tends to sit at about 3/4 of farmers across Australia. Yep, we want to keep this farm in the family. And then you come to the other end of the pipeline, and we're looking at 18 to 24%. Now, the top one is is North Central Victoria, and the bottom one is South Australia. But then you see the pipeline. You've got 80% of who've got their family working on the farm, which is a sibling or a child, and then you've got 51% who are including generations in decision making. 53% have an interested family member, but only 24% succession planning. So it's interesting that it's coming up really, really strong, but the succession plan's low. Now, remember I said at the beginning I was going to test you. Who wants to guess in the chat? What are the other things that we've got to really keep an eye on when we're looking at this kind of data and making extrapolations and trying to figure out what's going on in this data set? So why might that be? If all of this pipeline's coming through really strong, you've got that succession plan in place that it's lower. Why? Thank you, Owen. Yes, you win a lolly. Thank you very much. So exactly. So there's actually an 8-year difference. So on the Eyre Peninsula, for full-time farmers are on average 56. So they're actually 8 years younger. So that's going to make a difference as well in succession planning. So you've got to be really careful to keep an eye on these basics when you're looking at this data. Thanks for humoring me, everyone. And so these three factors here, as we continue to do this modeling, come up as really, really important in the work that we're doing. Collaboration. So keeping the family involved in decision making is really, really important. But also that holistic thinking and that comes from whole farm planning. So looking at the bigger picture of the land, how that works, and long-term thinking. And these all three can be linked directly back into, these are the bigger picture concepts, but people making decisions together, whole farm planning, succession planning. Those three things are probably some of the most important levers for supporting more resilient farming systems across the regions that we've been surveying. And this has come from much statistical work over the last 6 years. From this work, we were able to make some really, we can also hone in on the data around, well, we ask really basic questions like, what can we do? What kind of information or technology will better support your farming goals? And so we can just ask really simple questions and get really rich qualitative, open responses from farmers and landholders about what they need. So this is the kind of thing that we can then use to go back to AREP and say, right, these are the things that landholders are saying are important for them, and that also can directly help shape priorities. We also have questions around, in the last 12 months, what was the single biggest influence on your profitability? And when the last 12 months, as they had been in the Eyre Peninsula, were tough, we were able to then say, wow, these are the factors that have helped farmers who are doing, have somehow managed to get through a little bit easier than some others. So you can find some really useful information in this work to support those local partners. But look, I really want to hear from you guys about this. And then, of course, a big part of the work is getting out there and talking to people, as I am now, and saying this is what we found, and talking with as many stakeholders as possible, and there's and writing reports, fact sheets, information, and of course academic papers to improve the rigor and of our work as well, and play with more of those fancy statistics. And so all of that's there and it's available for you to look at. And there's also a dashboard as well that's currently in process, and Simon McDonald's working on that. So it'll be a really interactive way and an easy way for stakeholders to have a look at the work that we've done and make sense of it for their particular region. So, just to sum up, and before I go over to David and Naomi for a bit of a discussion around this, we can understand the things we can't change, but what motivates people. Also identify the things we can change, like knowledge and potentially confidence in practices, and to develop that strategic planning that's informed by farmer needs. But this is something I'd really love to hear, as I say, directly from our really key partners here. But to sum up, we're able to provide these really useful insights into landholder needs, to understand the underlying priorities, to guide strategic planning. And these three drivers, long-term thinking, holistic thinking, and collaboration, are absolutely critical to ongoing resilience in our agricultural and NRM systems. So. And also the other really crucial element is our young folks and up and coming. So again, I'd just like to give a good shout out to Doctors Alexanderson, Dr. Hunt, and Dr. Whiff for the wonderful work that they did. Matt looking at regenerative agriculture, Louise looking at intuition in farming, and Linda looking at the role of gender in women's knowledges in agriculture. So, and that's a way, if you want to use that QR code, you can go straight to the resources. But I'd like to stop talking now and really just go, have a chat with David and Naomi to hear from you a little bit about, your experience of being a part of this process. David, I've come into this much long after you. You've been, this particular next one that we're working being the 6th of the surveys. And Naomi, we've now worked together for the last 5 years or so on this. So I'd love to just first talk, maybe I might just go over to you first, Naomi, if that's all right, and just talking around that process of co-design. Like I know you were there, back in 2020 when we were all sitting on the Eyre Peninsula, and I stood out in front of the group and said, "Come on, guys, what do you need to know? How did you find that co-design process, and what were the kind of things that happened there?"
It was definitely a good process to go through. It was challenging to start to think about, well, what are all the possible things we could know, and how do we narrow that down to what's really useful to know? But I think having lots of different stakeholders in the room to have that discussion in the co-design was really critical to getting a survey that was useful. So yeah, it was a good process to go through.
Yeah, I think there was about 25 people there, if I recall correctly. It was a very full room in Winnipeg.
Yes.
People had traveled a long way for that one. So yeah, really appreciated. Yeah. And do you remember some of the key things that we were discussed? I mean, I'm going back in time a fair way here, just to put you on the spot. What ended up going into the survey, I should say, as a part of that process that was important for Eyre?
Well, we did it in conjunction with the landscape board as well, and so they were also key stakeholders. So we really needed to have, I guess, the really agricultural focused questions, as well as the how do you protect your land and your resource. So making sure we had a good balance of that, so the survey was useful to all of us, and there was, I guess, ownership and buy-in from those organisations. There were quite a range, and I think having an example of other questions that we used before really helped in saying, yes, that's relevant to us, or no, that's not. So not having to start from complete scratch was really helpful. Yeah, but areas around who our target audience might be and what their main areas of concern was really important to us as a new forming organisation out of a couple of existing grower groups. So how well do people recognise the grower group, and what were the important things going forward and information that they wanted, so that we could hit the ground running as a new organisation, basically.
Yeah, good point. Because we had EPAF and LEADER there, and it wasn't a done deal yet that AREP would form as an organization combining the goals of both groups. So it played, I guess it played quite a, I mean, I'm hoping it played a bit of a role in helping you to shape up the goals of the new AREP.
It certainly gave us more confidence that we could proceed and still be able to capture what all of our audience wanted. I think the real concern was if we joined two groups that were really quite very representative of farmers for two very different regions and join them together, they'd lose that local connection. That just helped us feel like, yes, we can keep that and ask the right questions and service all of our audience.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Naomi. And David, yeah, for you, it was when I went out to the Eyre Peninsula in 2020, that's the first time that, you know, this particular work had been done there, undertaken there. For you guys, when I came out to the Wimmera a few years ago now, entering for the 5th survey, you know, we had some different elements and things and challenges as we co-designed that first survey. Did you want to talk a little bit to that, David?
Yeah, sure, Hanabeth. Pleasingly, we really loved the flexible approach that you took, considering we had our first survey in 2002. So we're really keen to have those longitudinal questions incorporated, but have the nuance of contemporary issues and making sure that we're reflecting what some of the kind of leading market trends are, and some of the questions were around regenerative ag and soil organic carbon and those emerging issues. So we were able to combine the best of the history and the leading practices to come up with a really great survey.
Oh, thanks, David. I'm glad you see it that way. It was one because we really were grappling with that one across. We've got 16 pages. We're not going to make it any longer. It's big enough. You know, so how do we get something that's the best that it can be across space and time? And yeah, I think we did hit the mark quite well, I'd like to think. And also that the value and the things that came up along the way were really important. That focus on from the Eyre Peninsula, and they said, look, we think we've got lots of younger farmers. We want to know, do they feel supported? Do they need more help? And those sorts of questions allowed us not even to add many more questions in, but to change how we analyze things. So every time in the reports now, you'll see there's a section by generation. We just coarsely looked at, you know, the 3 different generations, X, Y, and baby boomers. And that helps us to now understand. So those sorts of things then came into the Wimmera survey, but also things like data and, yeah, the carbon questions and the biodiversity questions that all came from landholders across Australia and people working in the sector who went, hang on a minute, this is really important. We need to make sure that's in there. So yeah, no, thanks. And we just worked yesterday, David, doing the update. So we're going to be coming back to the Wimmera next year before too long. So yeah. Yeah, and do you think, David, have you seen as a result of this work, have you seen much change, do you think, over the time of the survey's been able to show your team that things are changing in the Wimmera or things are staying the same, and, you know, what things have popped out over time? I'd be really interested to hear about that.
Yeah, look, there's been a huge amount of change, and particularly things like sources of trust. And for a while, it was the farmer listens to the farmer next door, and that's where they get a lot of information from. However, we've seen as a trend over time, the agronomist plays such a large role these days. And so, yeah, there's changes like that. There's biophysical changes, such as the introduction of legumes in cereal crops to break the farming practice. We've also seen the different uptakes of different technology platforms, such as podcasts that were never around in 2002. And so what we're able to do is actually look at, well, what are some of the leading and lagging indicators, and have a really good understanding of what farmers are interested in at a point in time. And then that allows us to wrap our services and products around it. And I guess that classic one, the succession planning, that has just got more and more interest over time. And I think that also reflects the nature of farming businesses where they're often kind of sole farmers into corporate structures, into, hey, we're dealing with big bits of money now, and we need a really strong business plan and platform to base successful agriculture upon. And pleasingly, over that period of time, you can read that narrative, and so yeah, it's super rich in information.
Thanks, David. And I'd love to actually just ask both of you now, around how have you found, I mean, Naomi, I might just jump over to you if that's all right. In terms of the, David mentioned podcasts, and that reminded me that, we found out through the project that younger farmers love podcasts. Did you want to talk a little bit about how the survey results helped to inform some of the activities and further sort of funding priorities as well of Eyre and how that played out, Naomi?
Yeah, sure. So the survey really highlighted that all of the farmers thought there should be more support for young farmers. Like, there was concern that there was a gap there. So that led us to develop another project that we wouldn't have done, and work with people that we would never have worked with before or even thought about doing, more in the social space, about how young farmers want to engage. And so we spent time actually mapping how they want to receive their information, and now we've tailored programs specifically to deliver those activities. So it's evolved. There's been about 3 or 4 different projects as a result of the survey that have moved us down this path, and it's nice to see that showing up in the follow-up survey, that there's been an improvement there, and gives us the confidence to keep going with that. So yeah, that's a direct result of doing this survey.
Absolutely. And actually, I did save one little slide here. Just the end. There you go. There's the knowledge increase as well. So well done, Naomi. Great work. So excellent. Thanks, Naomi. That's great. And David, did you want to speak a little bit more about how this has helped to shape the priorities of Wimmera CMA? So talked about all these different changing priorities. How's that played a role in your strategic planning?
Yeah, from a planning perspective, I guess there's a plethora of information when you're looking at the biophysical landscape. You can get as many GIS shape files as you like, plenty of information. But when it comes to the understanding the human capital and the motivation and the people that actually manage the private land, there's not a lot of information. And so I guess we're in the business of working with people, and by allowing us to understand the motivations, the core values, we can then not only put that against our organisation's vision and motivations as well, but we feel that we can speak with a level of confidence about what are community priorities and what are the community issues, because we've actually got the data and the evidence to back it up. And I guess the richness of the data means for NRM organisations and farmer groups, I mean, that's really important, but equally that can be elevated to regional priorities, like when we've talked about connectivity and telecommunications and different services. We can point and work with other organisations and say, hey, these are the stats. And so, yeah, it's just not our organisation. It's a regional reference, and I guess that's why we continue to get a good participation rate by farmers, because they see the value in investing their time in it.
Thanks so much, David. And I think that's a great place to just sort of send it out for questions. I know there's a few that have come through on the Q&A. Did you want to manage that, Felicity or Catherine?
I think I'll to manage that. So
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who's been asking questions throughout. Some of it has been answered by different people during, but I do have, I'll check that the answered ones have been answered, but I'll go to the ones without answers at the moment. We do have an answer to them being published, and Felicity's put that in the chat, the links to the various survey reports. What are the key reasons? So that's to all three of you probably. What are the key reasons behind increased in farming production? And is that what you're looking at?
I wouldn't say we're actually not measuring production in this survey. We did in the past ask questions about profitability and people's income. Now we're more interested in things like what proportion of people's income is earned off farm. So those kind of patterns. We just found that for the purposes of what we're doing, Eyre does a really good job of all of that sort of stuff around production and numbers. So I think we're not really focused on that. We're focused on best practice implementation. We want to look at what are people doing and what's driving those practices. And we're not necessarily looking at the numbers that are coming from that in particular. So we are interested in a whole range of things around what is important to farmers, and production is a part of that. But no, we're not measuring production.
Okay, thank you. So just David and Naomi, I guess, particularly David, you mentioned there's a whole lot of information. So I guess it is about how you put things together and where this particular survey series fits with that other productivity information. Any brief comments on that?
I think that's the it's an important and fundamental part of the co-design process when looking at the survey, and when we're doing it in those iterations, whether it's 3 or 5 years, that allows us to actually ask really sensible contemporary questions to farmers, and it just creates that level of engagement and dialogue that you wouldn't otherwise have. So it's important that the survey reflects the needs of the farmers as much as the research questions themselves.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's really listening. Naomi, did you want to add?
Just that we have good access to production data through our state government, and it's split up into sub-regions as well, which is really nice. So we can overlay that with the types of response that we're getting geographically too. So yeah, it marries up quite nicely, but that would be doubling up in collection. So we just ask the practice questions. Yeah, what's leading to that?
Yep. Thank you. Oh, sorry. When costs. Oh, so I guess that's in Hanabeth, you were saying the rising production costs is an emerging issue, I guess.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Well, I think again, Eyre's they've published a lot on that. I think that's probably really, really good. No, in terms of if we're looking at big picture market changes, there's some really rich information there. I direct to that site.
I'll move on to Brad's question about, and there's another one that was from Charlie too, so I'll go. It's a little bit about who's filling in the survey, I guess. Is the average age of farmers a reflection of who's filling out the survey for each property? Are the parents sitting at home having a cup of tea, filling out the survey while the youngsters are out doing the work? I think I've paraphrased that accurately.
Yeah, look, I think
there's sort of a question from Charlie on that too about it being a postal survey. Does that influence who's filling it out? So your comments on that, Hanabeth?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. We've trialed a lot of different things since we've commenced this project in terms of, some of our partners will want to send out only one piece of information rather than what we usually do is we send an advance notice, then a survey and a reminder and another reminder and another survey, and we keep sending things out. And some councils will say, no, we just want to send out one thing. You give us 200 of them and we'll send them out to our list, and that's how they prefer to do things. So we've tried doing that through just survey forms, and we've tried sending out just notes with QR codes. And we found from the notes with QR codes that although our response rate overall, we might get the same sort of total number of responses for what we've spent on posting them out, we will get a much bigger proportion of hobby farmers, non-farmers, and younger farmers, younger landholders, and women. So you will find that the paper surveys are more likely to appeal to broadly speaking, older gentlemen. Very broadly speaking. Having said that, so that does make it does make a difference, and we found that when we had those subsamples, and we were surprised to sort of see, and that can be really important in keeping an eye on non-response bias and those sorts of things that we have to keep track of. However, what the reason that we also see value in that and the hybrid approach is that it allows us to have more of those voices involved. So there are people who will be more likely to just go, oh yeah, QR code, oh yeah, do it online when I'm in the tractor, versus I'm going to sit down with a cup of tea, I'm going to take my time, I'm going to fill it in. But there's a whole nother conversation there that we probably haven't quite got time for today, which is around who is actually making the decisions on the farm. And that's why initially we didn't have questions about who else is involved in decision making, and that's become a core part of the survey. And again, it comes back to, yes, there may be, I mean, I've been to field days where, yep, there's a whole bunch of younger farmers there. Oh, great, this is really different, from the last time I was here. Oh no, these guys are just here representing their parents. The parents make the decisions. So we are really trying to work with who is making the decisions, and how that plays out. Did you want to speak to any more of that, Naomi and David? Probably, maybe we've got time for one more question, Catherine, have we?
Yeah, we may have time for more. Melanie McLean's asked, and it's probably a question for Naomi, about the podcasts. For all three of you, podcasts are popular with younger farmers. Are there any other standout extension activities or methods that they like to use, particularly the younger people? Naomi?
Yeah, I might start with that one. Yep, so they were very specific in what they wanted. They wanted small groups of their peers to be able to get together. They wanted some of their key influencers who are also young in the region as well, their reseller agronomists, and their advisors present there so that they could ask questions and bounce off them as well. And then they wanted to self-direct exactly what topics they would talk about and what activities they would do. So small groups, self-directed, informal. They use WhatsApp as their way of communication amongst the group, and it's really effective. Yeah, they're probably the key ones. And then, how they get the information is, they said YouTube was still really good for following process and skill development type stuff, and podcasts were great for on the tractor or the header.
Thanks, Naomi. Excellent. And testimony to that work. That was Dr. Amanda Scott helping you with that network mapping, wasn't it? Yeah, great project. Fantastic. So I think we might be out of time. How are we going, Catherine?
There's one more question probably, and then we can wrap. It is about the workforce, the skilled workforce, and whether you're picking up anything through the surveys on the workforce. And
Yes.
then there is a question about modern slavery, which we might answer after we've wrapped up online, only because we don't have time.
Yes, we do look at the skilled workforce. I think when we're talking about, that's an interesting point. Yes, we definitely do, and that's in the reports in terms of the skilled workforce. We're talking about the children of the farmer, and on average, the farmer is in their 60s, so usually those children are in their 40s. So just to briefly on that one, but there's another whole conversation there we probably don't have time for right now, as Catherine says, but yeah. But when they say children, we're talking about children of, rather than people under the age of 18. So thanks for highlighting that one for clarification.
Yes. So were you going to be able to show the dashboard at?
Oh yes, if I can do that.
So what I might do is wrap up, because we did say we'd go to 1:30, but we will stay here for to have a preview of the dashboard. thank you for your attendance. And don't forget, there's another webinar next Wednesday, same time, different topic, but still around the knowledge sharing.
Yeah, and the risk reward. Thanks so much, Catherine, and everyone.
Risk reward tool. Yep.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And I will just give a very quick sneak peek into the Landholder dashboard that the CSU team, SPAN team are working on as a part of our project. And this is a sneak preview, and this is something that is definitely still under development. So please bear with us. But this is a very early prototype, but it's around providing just a broad understanding and basically turning a lot of our survey report data into something that's interactive that people can use and have a look at. So ultimately, this is something that we will have for each of the regions that we survey, and we'll have them for the different time periods, and we'll be able to look at things like the proportion of that are doing different types of decision making in that area, the advancement of succession planning, and then we can look at it through, specifically, we can look at it for full-time farmers only, and then you can start to interact with various items down the side, like generation, so full-time baby boomers. And there'll be all of the different elements you can navigate across down here. So this work is a work in progress, and it is our aspiration that this is going to be a really important and useful legacy of the Soil CRC. So stay tuned, and we will continue to share this work with you all as it becomes available. And also, if there's something, because we've now shared it at this really early stage, if there's something particular that you think should be in that dashboard, feel free to email me and let me know, because there's still time for us to adapt and change it, because this is a very early draft. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Really appreciate the really strong showing today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.